welcome to the Open Apple podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a long-time user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
Hello and welcome to Open Apple. This is episode 65 for November 2016. I am your co-host the first, Quinn, and with me as always is co-host the second, Mike McGinnis. How you doing, Mike?
It's been a bad year, just a really bad year, I think. But, you know, unless you're an Apple II fan, there's been a lot of great stuff happening with that. And I'm sure that people would rather talk about or listen to us talk about that than hear me complain about all the awful things that I think happen. So why don't we just move right on? How are you?
I'm good. So you know those apps where you can like record a sound and it makes like a synthesizer keyboard out of it and plays it at all different pitches and stuff?
Yeah, like fart sounds over different octaves and things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, sure.
I'm gonna make one. I'm gonna get one of those and make the Mike McGinnis side keyboard.
You know, I think our previous co-host Ken might have a nice library of just that waiting for you if you ask.
Sweet. There's a secret Mike Sci library. Okay. Yeah, so it's been good here. Not a ton of retro stuff going on here. I've been very busy at work, but I occasionally come into the spare bedroom and look longingly at my Apple II and wish that I had time. I did actually. I was on an airplane recently, and I managed to spend some time in Virtual 2 working on a side project that I'm hoping to show at K-Fest next year, if not sooner. But let's be realistic, I probably won't get it done before then. Playing with some graphics stuff. So hopefully I'll have something interesting to show.
8 or 9 months from now. That's playing the long game.
Yeah, that's about how long it takes me to get an Apple II thing done, just because, an hour here, an hour there. So I actually like having a long flight because I get to sit down and like have 3 hours to work on something or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess we can't be too mad at you because I'm sure that this doesn't exactly pay that well. So
yeah, I found that Apple II software development just doesn't pay what it used to.
Shocking. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know why that is.
What's wrong with these people?
I keep putting products out there and just people aren't buying it. I don't know. Maybe it's my marketing is the problem. I don't know.
You need to hire a PR firm, I think.
Yeah. I should spend a bunch of money on that and see how that I feel like that'll work. So what about you? What's going on with you?
It's been pretty quiet here. I'm just doing the work thing, and we recently moved to a smaller storage unit, which is both good and bad because it forced me to drag out all of my old Apple IIIs, and I've been playing with those, and have been met with varying levels of success. Some of them are more curmudgeonly and Mike-like than others, and refuse to work. But yeah, overall it's been fun, and going through a box and remembering, I have that. And in fact, I found my old original copy of Geos in a box that I thought I had gotten rid of, and the even has the copy protection dongle still back in the bubble wrap.
Oh, very cool. So did you say you were moving all of your stuff to a smaller storage unit, or do you also live in this storage unit? Because your phrasing was a little ambiguous there.
Well, considering how much I've spent on retro stuff, my wife has just gone ahead and moved me into the storage unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds wise.
She said by now my collection's worth more than I am, so it should be here in the house, and I get the storage unit.
Oh. You just made a big pile of Apple IIIs and you just roll around in it?
Well, I just turn them on, and it keeps me warm through the winter,
It would, yeah. Yeah, it would. Occasionally you drop one of them just to keep them going.
That's right, yep.
Yeah, I know how it works.
Reese chips.
So, Mike, I saw on Facebook something happened to or on Twitter, I guess, something happened to your scanner?
Yeah, finally gave up the ghost. That had been creaking along for a while now, which is going to force me to spend money that I don't want to, but I went and looked in this is one of those scanners that has the little control panel where you can go and see how many scans it's done since you last turned it on and in its lifetime, and it's well up over 100,000 scans, so probably time to let it go.
Wow. Yeah, well, that's no doubt due to Apple2scans.net, your Apple II scanning site, yes?
Plug, yes.
Seamless segue.
We are so good.
So good. And then we keep calling attention to them. So anything else going on, Mike? You got something in the notes here about Mike Whalen's interview?
Oh, yeah. I almost forgot about that. Mike Whalen, when he was at Kansas Fest this year, went around and made a series of recordings of the denizens of the hallways at night and things like that, and edited it together very nicely. It turned out really great. I think it originally aired on floppy days, but because floppy days is limited in bandwidth, Mike is, we provide, I guess, a venue for a better quality sound experience because we're not limited that way. So he offered it to us to broadcast as well. And so I think we're going to release that as like a 0.5 show. Because, our shows are like 6 hours long anyway, and we didn't really need to append that on. But, and because his recording is in stereo and ours is in mono, and they don't really mix that well. So, but look for that around the same time that this releases. Thank you, Mike.
Cool. Yeah, for sure. And, it's worth mentioning that we are the Apple II podcast and Gamebits is the Apple II conference. Right. So, it seems only fair that we should cover it. But yeah, having actually already listened to it and spoken in it, it is a really great listen. Mike's production values are awesome, and it's got a real sort of NPR kind of feel. He does a great man on the street kind of thing.
Yeah,
definitely a fun listen. All right, well, is that enough ado? Should we go into our interview?
Yeah, I'm sure they're sick of me by now, so let's go to the interview.
Hi, this is Al Lowe, and you're listening to Open Apple?
So with us on the show today is Alex Lee of the website What is the Apple IIgs? Hey, Alex, how you doing?
Hi, guys. I'm doing very well, thank you.
Nice to have you on the show.
Very nice to be here.
So let me just open with a personal thank you. Back when I got back into retro computing a couple of years ago, it was actually your site that did it.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a huge Apple IIgs person, and it was it's probably my favorite computer that I've ever owned. Well, not probably, it was definitely my favorite computer that I ever owned. And but I hadn't thought about it in 20 years. And one day I was bored and I was feeling nostalgic and just started Googling. And having grown up in a fairly small city, there wasn't really anybody else I knew that had one, or I didn't have any access to software or anything. So to me, it was sort of a weird computer that nobody had ever heard of. And I always wondered if there was, any references to it online or anything. And I started Googling and found your site, and my brain exploded all over again just to see all of the stuff that I'd forgotten about. And just the depth of your content is fantastic. There's all the manuals and all the software and the disk images and the screenshots, and it goes on and on. So thank you very much for that site existing.
Well, my pleasure. And it's interesting to note that too, I grew up in a town called Newcastle, north of Sydney, and I didn't know anybody else with an Apple IIgs either. And I think in a way that's always what's kept me strongly motivated about the Apple IIgs is just trying to get the content out there and letting everyone know that this stuff is available, especially in regards to IIgs specific software, because of course, the whole joy of, not the whole joy, but one of the main joys of owning an Apple IIgs was the 16-bit stuff that took advantage of all the unique capabilities of the IIgs and not just the 8-bit Apple II.
Yeah, and I think it was a computer that I think a lot of us who used it felt was really, really underappreciated. And, even to this day, I think people don't realize what that machine could do at the time, especially when you get into the later, Ninja Force stuff and the demo scene stuff. Some of it was just really, really astonishing.
Absolutely, yeah.
All of my Atari ST and Amiga friends used to make fun of the Apple IIgs kids at school and beat them up and take their lunch money because their processors were so slow and Apple was never going to support it. Your dad's a drunk, you know how it goes.
Yeah, well, it was also definitely a matter of platform pride to get the website up and running.
So, Alex, take us back to when you were a young Australian boy and tell us about your first experience with your Apple computers in general.
Yeah, I remember it very vividly. So around about sometime in early 1987, my mother sort of said we were going to buy a home computer. And I was very excited because, at last I could get a Commodore 64 like all my friends. Commodore 64s were great because, you'd put the tape in, press play, and you could go outside and play for half an hour before the game would actually, come on. But no, my mother had other ideas and, she was totally sold on how the Apple II was number one sort of educational computer. And I remember very distinctly she brought home a brochure all about the Apple IIgs. It looked great. The graphics looked, quite akin to what I was playing in arcades at the time. So I sort of, very, reluctantly agreed that, okay, we'll get this Apple II computer, not a Commodore 64. And then, of course, over time I sort of realized that it was quite a life-changing decision for me. Became an Apple fan, of course, became very interested in computer graphics, and I'm a graphic designer today. So that's how it's gone for me.
So you actually started out with the Apple II nobody wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd had contact with 8-bit Apple IIs. Our neighbours across the road had an Apple IIe that had, it was one of the original Model 2Es, not the Platinum one. And it had a monochrome screen and had very fond memories of going over there and playing Wavy Navy, a bit of karateka or karateka. So the 2GS was sort of more or less the first full-blown Apple II experience that I had.
Now, are you like so many of our other guests who had it for a while and then put it away and then rediscovered it? Or have you just been with the 2GS the whole time?
I probably put it away for a top of 12 months.
Wow, okay.
So the 2GS was our sort of family's primary computing platform right up until the end of 1994. So we had that from mid-1987 to the end of 94, and then I started university, and I thought, I better get serious and get something a bit more modern. So I sort of convinced my parents that the family would be better off getting a Power Mac, which was quite expensive, of course. So we got a Power Mac 7100, and that was running a PowerPC 601 at 66 megahertz. And after a year of that, I felt like it was slow. It was fantastic being able to play sort of new games all over again. Very fond memories of playing Doom 2 and all the LucasArts games that were coming out on the Mac at that time. And even as I sort of remembered the machine feeling slow, I got one of the new tech sort of overclock chips that you could attach to the processor, and so I could overclock it from 66 megahertz to 80 megahertz, and I thought this will fix the problem. Didn't really make any change at all. Not like, putting a zip or a transwarp GS does to a 2GS. So, and then around about I can't remember when it was, in 96, might have been mid-year 96, I saw that Heinrich Gudat of Bright Software was asking people to test an Apple IIgs emulator for the Power Mac. And so I thought, I'll get onto that. That sounds like fun. I'd love the whole idea of, I've moved up to the Mac now, but I'd still love to run 2GS software. And I got to be one of the testers of that. The product at that time, or the emulator, was called Fast Eddie, and then it evolved into Burning to the Rescue. And I've got to say, Burning to the Rescue, for me, is still my favorite 2GS emulator. It's not perfect, but as an all-round emulator, it sort of has quite nice compatibility with existing software, but the user interface and just all the features it has, for me, have always made it the best emulator. It's just a shame you can't run it particularly easily on modern Macs now. So literally put the 2GS down for maybe 12 months while I was playing some new games on the Mac.
I liked what you said there about the Power Mac almost immediately feeling slow. I think that is something that new computers suffer from more than they did. Like you mentioned, you had your 2GS from 87 to 94, and I think we all had a similar experience where that one computer lasted, 10 years, and it was still just as productive as the day you bought it. so barring, new things like the internet and so on, I think that, they would still be useful. So whereas modern computers, the software just seems to grow at a pace that matches or exceeds the hardware performance. And so they just sort of always feel too slow.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there were some wonderful things. I loved, at the time I was BBSing, and on the 2GS, the experience wasn't particularly great. I know that, Spectrum came out, but for me, I just didn't really have the hardware to match, and to sort of, buy a faster accelerator and a better hard drive and everything to make it run more smoothly. I just remembered I got a freeware terminal on the Power Mac as soon as I got it, and it was just wonderful having full ANSI graphics and no slowdowns, and I was just like, oh wow, this is wonderful. And of course playing those new games, but also at the same time, I kind of noticed that the Mac Finder was not nearly as nice as the 2GS Finder, especially with file copying options, and the fact that if you wanted to turn off system extensions, you literally had to move them out of the system folder, whereas the 2GS has always had the option just to deactivate an extension, and you don't have to move them. So that really surprised me. So, there were in a lot of ways it did feel like an upgrade, but at the same time, the 2GS was still doing things a lot better than System 7.5 was doing at the time on the Mac.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially in the area of color. It's what I always loved is how, the authors of the 2GS Finder really embraced the color, and they added features like the color labels and things throughout the Finder. And, it did things that the Macintosh Finder didn't do for years and years later.
Yeah, that's right. Even the thermometer bar startup, I think that came in Mac OS 7.6. So, yeah, the 2GS seemed to be quite advanced in a lot of ways.
Well, the Apple II paid for Mac for years, so why not give it some technology too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, it'd be interesting to know how much of GSOS might have influenced later Mac OS development. I'd like to hope that it did. I know that Dave Lyons and Andy Nichols, or was it Nicholas? I can't remember. I know they moved on to the Mac team after the Apple II team sort of was disbanded. But
so, at what point then did you decide to start up the what is the Apple IIgs?
Well, again, because I could sort of see that emulators were coming, and I was sort of enjoying emulation on the Power Mac, as slow as it was. I mean, it was still amazing that you could emulate any other sort of platform. I mean, that really appealed to me, being able to run all these, games from consoles and just check out other platforms that, of course, I'd never be able to afford to own myself. So I kind of took it upon myself to just start an archive, and immediately I beta testing the early version of Burning to the Rescue. I was imaging all my disks at that point and just running all the games for compatibility, and I'd feed back to Heinrich and Andre Horstman, what issues I was encountering with the programs. And so that was around about 1996, and I decided then I wanted to do graphic design quite seriously. I'd done a year of social sciences at university, and I quite enjoyed it, but I didn't know where I was heading with it. I mean, it was great doing philosophy, but I really didn't know what I would do with it. So, yeah, in 1996, I also sort of tied in that, yes, I wanted to do graphic design, and then I started using PageMill version 2. Do you remember that program in Adobe?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was the first sort of WYSIWYG type HTML editor.
Such as it was.
Yeah. So I threw myself into making a website, to sort of store all the archives, all the disk images that I'd been doing at that point. But I actually worked on that site for a couple of years before. I say a couple of years. It was probably 3 years until it actually went live. I think I'm a bit of a perfectionist in that regard, and I'm certainly a perfectionist when it comes to the coffee table book that I've been working on. Kind of prefer to delay things and sort of have them out in a more finished form. I I mean, I always remember back in those days, there were so many websites with this website is under construction with that animated GIF of the
GeoCities.
Yeah. And I just thought,
little shoveling guy. Yeah.
As a graphic designer wanting to present things, very professionally and visually, I just really wanted to avoid doing that. And then that. So the first version of the site was called the Apple IIgs Gaming Memory Fairway, if you remember.
Oh, that's
that.
right. I do. Yep.
And I quite liked how people just naturally sort of truncated the name of that down to just the Fairway. I thought that was really quite nice. I just came up with this bizarre long name that I thought would just be interesting and quite different from the names of other archives at the time. So I sort of just went with this whole golfing sort of, theme, which was quite strange now that I think back on it. But it was fun. Yeah, so, and then I had a friend host it. He ran a sort of PC business, so it got hosted from his sort of, from on site of his business for a while. But he sort of had to let me know, the amount of bandwidth being used on the site, I think you're going to have to move it somewhere else. And I think it was hosted somewhere else for a time. I can't remember. This was the early 2000s now. I can't remember it during that period, but then again, I think it came down to bandwidth issues, and I was asking around for people who might want to host it for free. And a chap called Greg Wildman sort of picked up hosting duties, and it's been hosted now for, probably 10 to 15 years now. And he's an IT professional in South Africa. And I kind of figured, well, if there are any issues with the content, because a lot of it is technically copyrighted content, then having the site hosted in South Africa kind of puts a nice buffer between me and the US and anyone who might want to come after me for hosting all this copyrighted software. And Greg's been fantastic. He's never once asked for anything in return for hosting the site. I sort of constantly thank him, and he just says, as long as it's for the Apple II, it's all good.
Well, that explains the .za domain. I always wondered about that.
Yeah. So quite strange, but I kind of figure if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But it would be nice perhaps to host it in the US, and that way I would imagine everyone would be getting faster speeds. But at the same time, given most sort of individual archives are probably no bigger than a megabyte, it's not too big a deal. It's funny. Most of the manual scans are much bigger than the actual disk image archives.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
But again, I'm quite keen on always optimizing the scans to make sure that the file sizes aren't ludicrously big, but the quality is still there as well.
Yeah, well, and I think you're not wrong about maybe having a little bit of legal buffer. I mean, these archive sites do exist in a legal gray area, and it's nice to have it in a place where if someone sends you a cease and desist, you can comfortably ignore it and nothing will ever happen.
I did get an email a long time ago, probably about 15 years ago or more, to remove Chessmaster 2100 of all titles, simply because I think that was a series that was ongoing, and so I did take it down. But then when I sort of vamped the site around 2007, 2008, I just put it back up there, and I haven't been in touch since.
So has that been the only legal request that you've had, or?
Joe Cohn got in touch with me again, probably 10 years ago. I think he specifically asked to remove Ultima I, which was fair enough because he was selling it, and I've always sort of made a note now that I double check whatever titles are being sold through Syndicom that they're not appearing on my site, and rather that my site will just link to whoever is actually still selling the software.
Well, these days that seems to be the key to a lot of this is, respectfully paying attention, and if somebody's, selling it, it doesn't matter if they're selling 5 or 1,000, it's distributing it for free when they're trying to do that. It's kind of bad karma, I think. So it's great to see, that you're able to put these things up there. And then when, the 1 or 2 requests that you have had come through, it's easy enough to say, okay, we'll take that down.
Yeah. I mean, I was quite weary actually when I did start the site. I thought it was interesting compared to other platforms, especially the other 16-bit platforms of the time, Amiga and Atari ST, that there were open archives and with just all this copyrighted software on it, and nobody seemed to bat an eyelid about it. But around about that time of the late 90s, early noughties in the Apple II community, any sort of copying was seen as being, very, very frowned upon. Piracy is running rampant, that sort of thing, and it's sort of stopping, Apple II development. But I mean, I kind of felt by that time, really, if you were expecting to make money from the Apple II, I think you had to be a bit realistic about how much money you would make. You probably wouldn't be able to live off it. It's certainly a grey area, but I sort of treaded very carefully. With the first version of the site, I used an alias, which is Helix Energy, which is a sort of alias I've used forever. It comes from a random Doctor Who episode called The Mask of Mandragora. But I sort of did that to sort of stay a bit safer. But then as time went on, I started using my real name, and only to look daggy now because, 4AM's made the whole pseudonym look cool again. So
That's right. Yeah, I think a lot of that came forth from those really awful flame wars in the late 90s on CSA2 and Delphi. And I think a lot of people, realistically, of course, they were smart enough to realize that, I'm not making my living off of this, or if I am, it's not going to last for long. It seemed to be more a matter of respect, like this, I put this out there and it is my property, so why is it showing up over here and you didn't tell me about this? And it can be an unpleasant surprise, I think.
Yeah.
And then you got some people who maybe didn't deal with their anger all that well and things got really ugly. But yeah, I like you, I think I had the same thoughts where I would see these huge archives of Commodore 64 software and nobody cared, but Apple II, man, they came right after you if you put anything up. So
no, I remember those flame wars too, and around about that time, 95, 96, I'd stopped reading ComSys Apple II, and I was never on Delphi. I found the whole Delphi thing quite strange, actually, because I kind of knew it existed, but I felt it was odd that you had to pay for this service to join the community. I felt that was a bit elitist, and I couldn't justify the money to do it, really. So I was never part of the Delphi community. But yeah, no, I mean, I certainly understand and appreciate that it could have curtailed future sort of Apple II developments. But I guess, really, I think, we should be doing it for the love of it rather than trying to think we're going to make a living from it.
yeah, I understand you wanting to quit reading CSA2. That got soul crushing for a while there.
Yeah. That was
pointless. I think it seems like kind of a natural effect as the market on a particular platform is dying off. People are going to be fighting harder and harder for the remaining scraps, and I think that's what we saw with the piracy, the anger around that. I remember one of the 2GS graphics packages I bought, or one of the 2GS packages I bought was Dream Graphics, and
I bought that.
Yeah, it was a beautiful piece of software. One of the only pieces of software I actually legitimately bought on the 2GS. And there was I remember the manual came with this large, angry red note. It was literally on a red piece of paper saying piracy is killing the Apple II. And there was this whole sermon about how you're a terrible person. And, which is ironic because I just paid for the software. And, at the time, I mean, I was a teenager and had no money and had saved my my snow shoveling allowance for quite a while to buy this thing. And then to be talked down to like a criminal was not a great experience, but then again, it was the only thing I bought, so I guess it was fair.
The double irony of it is of course that the authors of Dream Graphics were pirates themselves.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I know, they were the East Coast Connection group that cracked a lot of 2GS software.
Yeah, I wonder about that. The graphical style of the UI, it had a very distinctive kind of scene demo kind of feel to it, which is part of what I liked about it. But yeah, you sort of knew that, okay, the people that wrote this were were definitely in the scene. Yeah. I mean, it was also one of those things where software was transitioning to from a product model to a little more of a support model. And one of the reasons people would buy software is, instead of pirating it, was to get support. And the Dream Graphics folks, unfortunately, were not great about that. I had some questions and some feature suggestions for it, because I was also using Beagle Brothers Platinum Paint a lot. And it had a couple of features I really wanted, and I wanted to be using Dream Graphics. And so I asked for those features, and they were not kind to me when I requested that they possibly add some features. So,
really?
Kind of a negative experience all around, but it was still a lovely piece of software for what it was.
It was. I mean, I certainly did. I think I did the majority of the graphics I was doing at the time with Dream Graphics after that, but I was disappointed that the plug-in sort of architecture that was included with Dream Graphics never got exploited. I was sort of really hoping for all sorts of new plugins and that sort of thing, but yeah, that never happened.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if it had come out maybe 5 years sooner, it would have been brilliant and probably would have defined the platform. But yeah, it just came out at the very, very end, right when, it was in that period when nobody was finishing anything. Toolbox and FTA and all these people were putting out all these sort of demos of games that were tantalizing, and then nobody ever finished anything. And it was kind of exciting and depressing at the same time. Yeah,
it was. I mean, at the time I was doing graphics, trying to do graphics for games. I'd met a guy called Ian Brumby on a very rare thing in Australia at that time, which was an Apple II run BBS. He was based in Canberra, but immediately I thought, oh my God, I've met someone who can program on the 2GS, and it's like, let's make some games. And we started making a pinball game because there were no 2GS specific pinball games apart from Pinball Wizard, which was an unreleased game. And if you've ever played it, the physics of the ball don't work in any way I'm familiar with pinball games. So we needed a good pinball game, and then I did some graphics for that, and he started to code it, and then I moved on to another idea. We need a top-down vertical shooting game, and so I started graphics on that, and then I moved on to a horizontal side scroller idea, and poor old Ian couldn't keep up with all my crazy ideas, and in the end he ended up finishing Instant Access, which is a Finder replacement program. If you've ever used that, it's still really good to this day. It was sort of based on Directory Opus on the Amiga. Yes. Anyway, I've digressed.
I think a lot of us were doing that at the time. It's so much easier to start a software project than it is to finish it. The first 60% is a lot of fun, and the last 20% is utter misery, and then the middle 20% is somewhere in between. And I think there's a lot of unfinished computer games out there, I think, on people's hard drives.
Yeah. No, I'd like to actually post a blog on what is the Apple IIgs for all that work that I did. I think I've been keeping it, sort of just there in case, I suddenly get rich and I've got the time to finish these games, but really it's not going to happen, is it?
So have you ever thought about offering your services to retro game developers? I bet there's a lot of people out there that would want, pixel art.
Yeah, I haven't done pixel art probably since the late 90s now, and I mean I used to love doing it, but now that I've worked in sort of industry for graphic design now for the last round about 15 years, pixel art's very definitely a craft and an art form that requires time and sort of the commercial necessities of doing graphic design. My way of working with graphic design is just to churn and burn these days, unfortunately. And my sort of crafted pixel art has just really it's like if you've learned another language in the past, you just don't keep using it, you lose it. And I really felt like I've lost it, and I just probably wouldn't even have the patience to do pixel art anymore. And I think I was okay at it, but I don't think I was great. And that's why I've sort of suggested if anyone does want to develop a game on the 2GS, that they get in touch with the artists on Pixel Joint. I did quite a lot of slideshows converted to the 2GS of artwork on Pixel Joint, and everybody on Pixel Joint is just doing next level pixel artwork. It's amazing.
Yeah, there is some amazing stuff on there. Whenever I've Googled, if I'm working on a project, sometimes I'll just Google sprite sets and things, and I seem to always end up on Pixel Joint and just find amazing things hiding in there. It is a great resource. So what are your future plans for the site?
Well, I've had in mind for a while that I'd like to do a complete makeover of the site. It's obviously getting a bit old. It's not responsively designed, so it's not going to sort of show up particularly nicely on smartphones. Sort of adding a few more fields. Sort of been scanning even just the disk labels of 2GS software, but there's sort of no field at the moment to put that in on the site. Yeah, it's tricky because there are periods where I really like to try and focus on working on the coffee table book, and then Antoine will sort of archive a whole bunch of things that we didn't currently have archived, and then I switch from working on the coffee table book back to archiving, and I still have all these other ideas about just making the website better, and yeah, just with work and having a 2-year-old daughter, it's a very crazy way of dividing up all my time. Yes, it's just tricky. I'm not particularly good at organising my time, but I just sort of go the scattergun approach, and it kind of means that it's kind of just like it was back doing games on the 2GS 20 years ago. You get so much of it done, but a lot of things don't get finished.
So one thing I love about your site is the completeness of it. You have scans of box art and manuals and all sorts of things. Where have you acquired all of this content over the years? Have you been scanning it all yourself, or do people submit it? Or
people definitely submit it. So when I revamped the site in 2007, 2008, I included all these fields for things like manuals and even game solutions and things like that. And I kind of felt at the time, well, I didn't want to scan the manuals myself. I own quite a large, collection of boxed Apple II and 2GS software myself. Most of that was actually from when our family sort of originally bought it in the late 80s. But I kind of just felt, again, I wanted to concentrate on the coffee table book, or just getting new disk images put up on the site rather than spending the time scanning manuals. But I can't remember the guy's name. He runs the Apple IIgs info site in France, and he sent me a whole bunch of manual scans that he had done, and that kind of just motivated me. Well, you know what? We've got all these scans already that he's done. If I scanned all the titles he hasn't done from my collection, we can add them together. And that sort of kick-started the whole scanning of manuals for me. So it's just like gathering momentum, and it just snowballed. And then Antoine, of course, started scanning manuals as well. And we've got a pretty complete set of manuals for almost all 2GS software now. I mean, we're still missing quite a bit, but I'd say 3/4 of 2GS specific software has a manual for it now, which is fantastic.
So are there any like unicorns? Like, I wish I could find a scan of this box art or a disk image for that game or anything like that?
Always. Oh gosh, the unicorns. So I've been on eBay for 15 years now, and there are just some titles that have never ever come up. It's so frustrating. Even simple things. So unicorns, literally, unicorn software came out with a lot of educational software. Things like Tales of the Arabian Nights and The Adventures of Sinbad, and all these sort of reading, writing, comprehension programs. Some mathematics programs, and I don't think I've ever seen some of those titles ever come up for sale on eBay. Antoine actually got in touch with someone who used to work at Unicorn Software, and he doesn't have copies of them anymore. Also, the number one title I'm after at the moment is Academic Quiz Kid, which, as far as I know, was the last 2GS specific piece of software that Orange Cherry did. And I could be wrong, but I've got the catalog from Orange Cherry from that time, and it looks like the program could be AppleTalk networked. It doesn't go into specifics, but in my head, I'm imagining that if you had a lab full of 2GSs, you could have set up quizzes for students, and then perhaps all the results were recorded and sent to a central server or something like that. But it sounds really interesting, and just for that reason alone, that for me is the number one sort of unicorn. But I've been in touch with two people who worked at Orange Cherry, and neither of them have copies of it. So we've gotten really close, but it's still not close enough to really tracking down some of these lost archives. So at least with the unicorn titles, we have disk images of them. But Academic Quiz Kid, we don't even have a disk image for that. Other sort of unicorns, there's Laureate Learning Systems titles. So recently, Brian Weiser was able to supply 4AM with his discs of the 8-bit titles that Laureate did. And Laureate specialized in special needs educational software, but they also did 2GS-specific versions as well. And we don't have any of those archived. And another frustrating thing was, I think even 10 years ago, they might have actually still been selling them on their website, but the prices were still kind of like early 90s prices, and I kind of felt, I can't really afford to buy, half a dozen titles and get them shipped to Australia just for archiving them. But then, of course, they disappeared from the website, and I really regret not buying them at the time. I've been in touch with them since, and they're like, "What? Apple 2GS? What's that?" I'm quite worried that they're just not archived anywhere. Those titles, they must exist somewhere, and that's the frustrating thing. But they're not within the hands of those who are especially keen like us to archive the software.
Yeah, that really echoes what people like 4AM and Jason Scott and other archivists have been saying, is that, we don't need the games. I mean, we got all those. Everybody had those, and everybody still has them. It's the weird stuff. It's the educational stuff. It's some of the business software. It's the utilities. That's the stuff that vanished. And the educational stuff's especially challenging, I'm sure, because, mainly only schools bought it, and they were probably quick to throw it away when they no longer needed it. And nobody thought it was going to be, interesting to archive. And then related to that, 4AM's always talking about how copy protection has been the great enemy to archival. Have you encountered any issues with that, with things being copy protected?
Absolutely, and I'm not a cracker at all myself. My sector editing skills are very basic. So I was lucky that, it's been quite a few years ago that I've collaborated with Antoine in that, he's able to crack the titles and I'll get them online and hopefully they'll live forever. And it's been so great for 4AM to come onto the scene and sort of make mention of how copy protection has actually worked. We kind of assumed, we're all patting ourselves on the back and saying, look how clever we are. We've cracked all the software. We really haven't. And it all came down to what was cool back in the 80s and the 90s. Of course you're going to crack Rastan, but are you going to crack Talking Academic Quiz Kid and share that around and go, hey, I'm totally elite, guys.
You're a loser. We're going to beat you up. Get out of here.
So, and of course now we're in the situation where we are today, where just a lot of this software, which could be fun. And for me, now that I do have a 2-year-old daughter and we play Sticky Bear on the 2GS, she loves it. So I'm really motivated. I've been motivated for years to really try and track down educational software.
Now, you have had some success in getting unreleased titles, at least a few of them uploaded. Has that been just, again, donations, or have you actively pursued some of these?
Oh, I've actively pursued them, but they've always led to dead ends. It was wonderful that Hubert Albers just recently released Jigsaw Deluxe, because he's been saying for years, oh yes, it's stored away somewhere on my old hard drive, which is in Spain. I live in Mexico now. And I'm like, oh, when are you going to make that trip over to Spain again?
Yeah, I think he mentioned that when he was on our show last year.
Yeah. So, of course, as it turned out, Antoine got Hubert's old 2GS with hard drive, and he had a devil of a time backing up the contents, but he managed to do it, and so Jigsaw Deluxe is now archived as well, which is fantastic. But I've kind of felt in more recent years, I don't know, I've kind of given up on really expecting to find these gaming unicorns. So things like Renegade, the side-scrolling beat-em-up game. I just don't think, I don't know, I just can't imagine it still exists anywhere. And again, if it does, it's lying on a shelf, on a dusty shelf somewhere, and the media's going to die before anybody's going to get to image it. It's particularly frustrating because I only knew one other person in Newcastle who was actively an Apple IIgs user, and he swears he saw the 2GS version of Renegade from some guy that bought it in Hong Kong. It all sounds incredibly unlikely to me, but he absolutely swears and said he's sure it wasn't the version that's, the 3.5-inch disc version, that's just the 8-bit version on a 3.5-inch disc. And he said, no, it's definitely 2GS. And there is evidence out there that supports that there was a 2GS version. I bought the 8-bit version of Renegade, and the screenshot on the back of it has a 2GS screenshot. It's definitely a 2GS screenshot because it's using the Shaston font. But I just feel like you've got to give up at some point. Yeah, I mean, another game for me that I was really hoping should exist was Manhunter San Francisco, the sequel to Manhunter New York. Yeah, Manhunters, it was such a great game, quite different from anything else Sierra had done. I really loved the sort of 70s sort of sci-fi influences on it, and that it was gory, and it was really cool, and there's no reason why at least no technical reason why Sierra didn't release Manhunter San Francisco, because that was the last game that Sierra used using the AGI development platform, I should say. And I think it was probably just a marketing decision or a sales decision that perhaps Manhunter New York didn't sell particularly well on all platforms, but particularly on the 2GS because it had even a smaller audience, and they decided not to release the sequel. I don't know, but that was sort of disappointing. Again, I'd always hoped too that someone might be able to convert the homebrew AGI games that people have done and actually get them to work on the 2GS. But, I'm sure that requires a fair amount of sort of programming skill that I certainly don't have. But that would be fun, that perhaps we could hack together a version of Manhunter San Francisco to work on the 2GS. But then it probably wouldn't have the really cool music and digitized sound effects that all the other 2GS titles had for those Sierra games.
Yeah, I've actually been in those meetings where people are making that decision, and it's like, well, even if it's literally just, a couple of weeks of converting some art assets and releasing it, if it's only going to sell, a tiny number of copies, and even though it's super easy to do, it's just not worth it to do it. And I think that happened a lot with the 2GS, especially towards the end, because you see a lot of game boxes, with 2GS screenshots on the back or references to the 2GS. For me, the biggest unicorn for me on that front was Ultima VI, and that was, that was the one game that I wanted more than any other, and it was the game where Origin cut the Apple II out of their supported hardware line, and it was such an amazing looking game. And there was that tiny little reference to the 2GS on the back of the box on the PC version. And I clung to that for years.
Yeah.
Just sure that a 2GS version was going to come out because they mentioned it on the box. And there was something about, Apple 2GS's trademark, Apple or whatever. And I clung to that. And then for years, I clung to the notion that, well, maybe there was a version in development and maybe that will turn up someday. And I think as far as I've been able to determine, there was never even a version of it that anyone had started developing. Have you heard anything different on that?
I remember Antoine actually asked John Romero, because John Romero was working in Origin at the time, and he seemed to think the project had never really started on the 2GS or never actually started. That's the last I remember of it. I've got an entry on what is the Apple IIgs for Ultima VI in the unreleased section. I'd need to refer to that to see what the last sort of rumors actually were. But it did seem to confirm that, it wasn't really started. And it was quite interesting. I can't remember the name of the podcast. It's a UK-based retro gaming podcast, and they interviewed Richard Garriott. And Richard Garriott actually said that he was still so mad keen on the 8-bit Apple II, even in the late 80s, that it almost bankrupted the company because they were just focusing on doing killer Apple II games. And that would have been games like Space Rogue and Knights of Legend, these epic RPGs that look amazing. Yeah, Times of Law, and but then he kind of realized a bit late that all the coding stuff were sort of specialist coding in 6502, and they really needed to move on to other platforms if they were going to survive. I really recommend checking out that podcast. It's a great interview with Richard Garriott, actually.
Okay, yeah, we'll try and dig that up and link to it in the show notes. Yeah, those last few years of 8-bit support from Origin were incredible. I mean, Space Rogue, that's a game that never should have existed on the 8-bit. It's an astonishing game, and one that I actually still play to this day. And Knights of Legend is probably in my top 3 favorites Apple II games of all time, but that one has not held up quite as well, mainly because of the commitment required to play it. It's something like 12 or 10 or 12 sides, and there's so much disk swapping going on. Just to look at your character, screen, you have to swap disks, and then if you want to look at what armor your character is wearing, you swap disks again, and it just goes on and on and on. And I was happy to do that as a youth, but I don't have the patience for it today.
No. When was it? 2013. I actually flew to California specifically to stay at Tony Diaz's place to see what archives he had. And I actually found a 3.5-inch disc installer for Knights of Legend, and that's on what is the Apple IIgs. And apparently it's a legitimate installer that the author wrote due to criticisms of all the disc swapping. And but I couldn't get it to work. I downloaded copies of the game from Asimov, and they were all cracked. So I was thinking maybe the cracked versions are just not working with the installer, so it might require original versions to run with the installer. But yes, that would be awesome to have all that on a single 3.5-inch disc volume.
Yeah, that would be amazing. And that, I guess we would also have to dig up the manual. I don't know, do you have a scan of the manual for that on your site, or do you know one?
I don't have a scan of it, but I know that Jeremy Barr Hyde, who's another Australian Apple II guy, who's only just recently come back to the Apple II, he got quite a large haul of boxed Apple II software, and one of which was Knights of Legend. I remember that. So I think I can't remember whether I've already asked him to image the discs. But if it's anyone who could image the discs, it would be him, because he's already got quite a detailed blog on how he's recovering a lot of Australian specific 8-bit Apple II software, using Passport, using EDD card. So yeah, hopefully he'll be able to get round to some nice fresh copies of Knights of Legend, and hopefully scanning the manual as well.
That would be excellent. Yeah, I also, of course, pirated that game back in the day. But one of my junior high school schoolmates had bought it and had the manual for it. So we sort of passed the manual around so we could all read it. And I mean, it was a phone book. I mean, it was a novel, and the game's utterly unplayable without it. I mean, there's just pages and pages of charts of armor and weapons, and the economy is all explained, and it just, it's the level of commitment that 80s RPGs required that I don't think you can get away with today. But it's definitely unplayable without that manual.
Yeah. Another, or at least a similar title, in that, how economy actually affected things was BattleTech, and I recently added BattleTech. Well, I say recently; it's been the last couple of years as a 8-bit game on a 3.5-inch disc. So that's there. But I started playing it, and it's like economy's affecting my character and what I can buy, and it's like, oh my goodness, I just want to play, a game with Macross and Robotech inspired giant mecha, not worry so much about the hardcore economics and how that affects the game universe.
Well, I will say in terms of unicorns, to wrap that up, the one that I was really glad to see on your site is Time Lord. That was, to me, just an earth-shattering game demo. Again, really heartbreaking that whoever produced that game never finished it. If there's any 2GS programmers out there looking for a project, please finish that game, because it was just visually astonishing and really, really amazing. The potential of it. There was different pieces of UI, there that weren't functional yet, and you could kind of see what they were going for, and that, the production values were amazing. And I've never quite forgiven the universe for having that game never be finished.
Yeah, I remember coming across that demo years and years and years ago, and I was like, wow, this is amazing, and just felt so, what's the word? Quite an in-depth game, basically, and you could see the potential of just, adventuring for hours with it. And, but yeah, I suppose our expectations were already shaped by the early to mid 90s that, it's not finished. Yeah.
Yeah. It had the potential. It was good. It looked like Alien Mind kind of taken to the next level. I think, it's got to be on everyone's short list of favorite 2GS games, but, just all of the knowledge of this, that the scene programmers and demo programmers had brought to the 2GS by that point, was just all poured into those last couple of demos that people were producing. And but it wasn't to be. I think Gate was another one. There was a game called Gate that was never quite finished. Oh no,
Gate was finished.
Was it? Okay, yeah, it was certainly playable. I was under the impression it was a demo though.
Yeah, no, there was a demo, and I think I've got the demo version included. But Seven Hills Software actually released Gate to the US market, and I believe Toolbox released it in France.
Okay.
I've not finished Gate, but no, it definitely exists as a complete game. It's on what is the Apple IIgs.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay, I'll have to try that. I may have only played the demo. I don't remember about that one.
Yeah. And I know we've talked about this for quite a long time, but, other unicorns, of course, include the playable version of Sword of Sodan. So the demo of that's, been available forever. I've certainly tried to chase that up. Mitch Spector has tried to chase that up for years. The last lead he had was that Jimmy Huey, 8-bit and 2GS programmer. He was given the source code to try and complete the project. But I've tried contacting him myself, and he hasn't responded. So.
Yeah, Sword of Sodan was certainly remarkable. I mean, that was someone sat down and said, let's see how big we can make characters on the 2GS.
Yeah.
It is really something special for sure, that engine.
Quinn, weren't you able to donate something recently to the 2GS, what is it, 2GS?
Donate something?
A sweary mod from a...
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yes, I've forgotten that.
Yeah, I guess
Task Force.
Yeah, I only indirectly donated that, I guess. So the backstory for anyone who doesn't know is that growing up, we had Task Force, as many of us did, and someone from some BBS or somewhere, I don't remember where, I got this swear hack for it, which replaced all the sounds, all of the voiceover sounds with naughty words, which, to a junior high school kid was hilarious. And, to some adults as well. And, but of course, this wasn't widespread apparently, and I couldn't find anyone else in the Apple II community who had heard of this thing or had any idea what I was talking about. And people didn't believe me that it existed. And I couldn't image it myself because it was in my parents' basement 2,000 miles away. But
you're such a liar, Quinn.
Yes. But I think it did show up. So I think I asked around on the Apple II Enthusiasts Facebook group or somewhere, and someone did actually turn it up. Someone else did have it, and assured me that I was not crazy and this did exist. And so it is archived now finally. So that was good news.
No, I was pleased because I'd certainly had requests over the years, and I'd never heard of it before. So, yeah, when you guys were talking about it, I was like, oh, wow, excellent. We're going to have to track that down.
Yeah, it's funny how apparently rare it was, and yet somehow it landed in my hands, in a suburban, semi-rural junior high school in a small city in Canada. I can't imagine, I can see someone in Silicon Valley having it or whatever, but I don't know how on earth did it end up so far away, and yet nobody else had heard of it. That's pretty interesting.
Well, I still find in searching through whatever recovered archives there are, so the Mac GUI vault recently recovered is it Genie's archives and even Delphi's archives? Yep. Mm-hmm. It's just interesting how some programs you can find across all archives, all those old archives, whether it was sort of maybe Apple Link or Genie or Delphi, but then some programs just only seem to make it as far as one online service, and it just didn't seem to get spread around. That I still come across little bits and pieces like that, which is... It's so exciting, actually. It's like treasure hunting. I'm sifting for gold through all these old archives. I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I bet a lot of software now only exists probably on Usenet too. For a while there, the way to exchange software was, bin hexing and UU encoding and posting in giant threads in Usenet, and there was Byzantine software utilities to glue these posts together back into one and then un-UU encode it. And then maybe if you didn't miss a bit anywhere in your copy and pasting, it might actually work. And it was such a painful process. I think I got it to work a couple of times, but I would not be shocked if there's software that only exists in that form somewhere.
Yeah, I haven't dipped back into Usenet. I mean, I remember at the time, in the I don't know, about 93, 94, when I first got a modem, and I was doing all that, and I just thought I was a mad hacksaw being able to download stuff from Usenet and then decode it. But I don't have the time for that anymore.
I would be remiss if we moved on without talking about this. In fact, you've mentioned it a couple of times. A coffee table book. What's going on with that?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, constantly. Well, I say constantly. I might not be working on it for a month or so. What I have done in the last probably 18 months is rejig the layouts, which I'm fairly happy with. But I've got to say, it's actually really difficult to sort of find the right balance between adding the amount of content that I've sort of amassed. So I've taken so many more screenshots of every game, and what I've always wanted to do with the book is actually have the screenshots in a sort of chronological order, so that it's almost like a comic book. You could read the game, as narrative, through the screenshots in order. And of course, just playing through every game takes a long time to do that. And there's still some RPGs that I'm like, oh my goodness, how am I going to find the time to play through these? But I've sort of focused on trying to get the gaming part done, because it's definitely the biggest section of the book. And it's gotten to a size now where I've had to consider, well, maybe I should split the book up into 4 different volumes, just like essentially the What is the 2GS site is. And and again, I was really working hard the last 18 months to try and get the book finished for the 30th anniversary of the 2GS this year, but alas, it hasn't worked out that way. And dare I say it, part of the problem's me is I'm a perfectionist, unfortunately, and I started doing this project as a book. Oh gosh, probably 10, 11 years ago now, and it was a project that I wanted to set for myself. I didn't have any marketing people telling me what to do, and really no sort of commercial sort of decisions that should be influencing how the book should be done. I mean, obviously, I need to make it cost effective so that when it is finished, it won't be crazy expensive, like Apple's brand new coffee table book.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just like I was saying too, like as part of that, I've tried to reduce the page count, because I've got so much. I've probably got too much content now. So it's a ludicrously high page count. So I've got to whittle things down and try and redesign layouts so that I'm still including the same amount of visual content I always wanted to do, but just with more economy on the number of number of pages in the book itself.
Can't wait to see that.
Yeah, no, I apologize to everyone, actually. I think people are probably giving up on me, just like I'm giving up on all these unreleased unicorn games. But rest assured, I just want it to be the best possible book, and that you'll all be happy to have it on your coffee tables. And when you've got the neighbours over, you can convert them. You can convert them to the Apple II. They will become one of us.
Well, I'd rather spend $300 on that than a coffee table book that doesn't even include Apple II stuff. So,
yeah. Look, I don't think I'll buy it, but I am intrigued to see Apple's coffee table book. I'm keen to see from a design perspective, how they've done it all. I'm sure, of course, I've seen sample pages of it. And it looks all very minimal, but I'm just curious, as a sort of tangible physical thing, how does it feel and how does it look? But yeah, I don't think I could justify the price point just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Well, regarding your coffee table book, all I have to say is shut up and take my money.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I'm honestly not normally a coffee table book person, but because they just end up being something you have to dust for the rest of your life. But I will absolutely buy this regardless of the cost. So whenever it's ready, I will be there with credit card in hand.
Me too. Shut up and take Quinn's money.
Well, I've considered, should it be a physically printed book, or should it be something more digital, like an app? I still like the idea of the book. I mean, in many ways, I think we should be sort of archiving things in a hard copy form, because, as it's turned out, digital isn't that reliable as a permanent storage method at all. Yeah, I've considered back and forth. Well, maybe it shouldn't be a physical book, but look, I'll see it through. Don't worry. I will gladly take your money.
We have faith.
See how it goes. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, I certainly didn't do it to make money from it, but I given that I've spent 10 years on it now, I feel like, oh gosh, I should probably make some sort of return on this investment of time. But yeah.
Excellent. Well, Mike, any last questions before we move on to the news?
No, I think that pretty much covers it.
All right. Alex, do you have time to stick around with us here?
I sure do.
Excellent. All right, Mike, give me a bumper.
It may be old, but there's still news. Apple II news.
Well, we've got quite a bit of news here, so we'll probably burn through it fairly quickly, since we had a lovely chat there that went a little longer than our interviews usually do. We just can't can't help talking 2GS all day.
Yeah, I know.
So, first news item: Michael Mahone of Kansas Fest fame and luminary in the community, if you like, has been simulating Burroughs 220 on his Apple IIe, and this is something that he showed at Kansas Fest this year. And it was really cool. It was kind of preliminary, and he's been adding consistently to it. So it's looking to be quite complete now. I love this project. I think it's really neat to simulate something really old on something slightly less old. That just it just tickles me, and I'm not sure why, but it does. Have you seen this one, Alex?
I looked at it this morning, and so is it a simulator rather than an emulator?
I would say so, yes. I don't think he's trying to be cycle accurate or anything like that. He's just simulating the architecture and the peripherals, yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm always interested in sort of old mainframe and mini computers. I went, when I was traveling around Europe, I went, and living in the UK, I went to Bletchley Park, and they have an amazing museum of just gear there, old mainframes, vacuum tube stuff. Supposedly the first computer in the world that was a code-breaking thing against the Nazis. So, yeah, I'm definitely interested in that, but don't know a lot about it.
Cool. Okay, moving right along. We've got, speaking of RPGs, we've done a lot of talking about those here today. Nox Archaist is an RPG that is being developed by the fine folks over at 6502 Workshop, and it's a very Ultima-esque 8-bit engine that they're developing. And this is kind of a neat thing they're doing is kind of preview along the way while they're developing the game. They've started releasing these little story vignettes that are built in the engine, and so we'll link to the first episode of those. This one's called Shattered Sword, and it's really nice. It tells a story. There's music, and tells the story with all of it in engine, except I think the music, which is overdubbed, but it shows off some nice features of the engine. And in fact, this particular video is showing conversation with NPCs and NPCs moving between locations based on a daily schedule, and some new interactive tiles. So it's looking really, really good. They've made a lot of progress since their last video that they showed. So definitely looking forward to this one.
I love in the latest video that when you go to bed, your character actually appears in the bed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Instead of just standing beside it saying, "You are asleep now."
Yeah. And the visibility I really like. When the character goes inside buildings, your field of view is constrained to what you can see, through the doorway, sort of raycasting out through the doorway, and just shows you those areas of the outside based on your line of sight. It's really nicely done.
Yeah.
And it's fairly expensive to do that kind of thing, so it's nice that they're getting good frame rates.
Yep.
All right, moving right along. Looks like ADT Pro 2.02 has been released, and I believe this was to add some support for like the Ethernet 2. I think, support for Ethernet 2 added, and some bug fixes to V-Drive and Ethernet audio and server things. So nice to see that ADT Pro is still being updated. I assume you've used ADT Pro, Alex?
Believe it or not, I have never used ADT Pro.
Wow, okay. Wow.
Yeah. In archiving all my sort of 2GS software, I would just always use old Macs with floppy drives. And then either Apple talk them across or share them across some other way that way. And then in more recent times, I've just been using the CFFA 3000.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the 2GS is sort of uniquely situated that way. It still has a sort of tenuous bridge to the modern world via Apple Talk and 3.5-inch floppies and other mechanisms. Yeah. Oh, very cool. Well, speaking of 2GS system software, System 603 came out fairly recently, and we're hearing from Antoine Vigneault that it's got a fairly serious bug in it. The aux types are not being generated correctly, which means that drivers and some other things have the incorrect aux type on them, which can cause all sorts of misbehavior. For example, SCSI drivers not working properly, and so on. So he's recommending people stick with 602 for now, and hopefully people can get that bug sorted out. Have you used any of these newly released system or GSOS versions, Alex?
I have, but from my perspective, it's funny because a lot of people who download software off what is the Apple IIgs, they kind of just they quickly want to play an old game. You know, they might not. I would call them casual users, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I was sort of actually in two minds about actually including System 6.0.2 and 3 because potentially, you know, running games off those systems, the games might not work anymore. And there was a bit of discussion on the Facebook Apple II enthusiast group about this, and I got convinced. So I've got them up there, but I've got to be honest, I kind of still stick to System 6.01. Just to make sure. Interestingly enough, just some quick tests I did with John Brooks' Protos version 2.4.1. I updated a local version of one of my sort of 32 meg drives that self-boots, and the cracks we have of Rastan and Pipedream don't work with Protos version 2.4.1. So I kind of need more time to evaluate what has broken, and then we might need to find alternative cracks. So I'm kind of, again, of the mindset that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I certainly encourage, you know, new efforts into Protos and GSOS, and I really look forward to see what's going to come next.
Yeah, for sure. I like that. I like that people are doing this, at the very least. So actually, Alex, you mentioned earlier in the show this next item. Hubert Alberts has recovered some of his old software that was previously thought lost. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So Hubert's it's written on his website, but he actually wrote the original Jigsaw in about a weekend. So he says. And he was able to sell it to Britannica Software, and it sold 100,000 copies. Mm-hmm. And but he didn't feel that was particularly reflective of his skill as a programmer, and so he'd always set about doing Jigsaw Deluxe, or at least an updated version that he hoped that Britannica would then sort of sell on. But Britannica sort of said, we don't need it, and by that time they felt the GS market was drying up. And so they never decided to release Jigsaw Deluxe. It would have been nice, perhaps, for Britannica just to, I mean, if they offered any sort of upgrades, to just offer Jigsaw Deluxe as a free upgrade, perhaps. Mm-hmm. But the game itself has a 2-player mode now and many more features to sort of, you know, challenge puzzle lovers everywhere.
Excellent. Well, we will definitely link to that on his site, and of course on What Is the 2GS. We had him on the show fairly recently, and he talked about that, how his experience with Jigsaw, the return on investment was so amazing. You know, for a weekend of work, he made all this money, and but it seems to have been a bit of a one-hit wonder, because he then thought, well, okay, I'll do something really, really special, and he's spent, you know, many months working on, I think it was Laser Force, was sort of his opus, and then it just didn't do well at all, unfortunately, which was the fleeting nature of the market at the time, for sure.
Yeah.
Quite a shame.
Yeah, we've talked to a lot of developers from the era who encountered that, where they wrote one, especially in the early 8-bit days, they wrote one word processor, one game, and then, you know, made $2 million and sailed around the world or whatever, and spent it all. And then when they came back, the market was gone, and suddenly software was no longer a one-person thing, and it was a whole different world. So there was a window there for the artiste, I think. All right, Mike helps out with this next one. Looks like Brutal Deluxe has been scanning tapes. Is scanning the right word for tapes? I don't know.
I think the audio term is ripping.
Okay,
maybe. I don't know. It's I we've talked about this collection a few times before on the show, and it just keeps getting bigger, and it keeps amazing me that they keep finding more tapes to make copies of, because I had no idea this much software was even released on cassette. But Antoine has added more titles to the cassette collection over at Brutal Deluxe, and they're now up to 653 titles as of 1 November. So congrats, guys, and oh my goodness.
I'm astonished. I literally never saw a piece of real Apple II software on tape. Floppy disks just took over immediately, at least where I was. So I never saw any of this. And I just, like you said, I'm astonished that much software came out on tape. Amazing.
I think I've got one. I think I've only ever seen one Apple II tape in my life in the flesh.
Kids these days.
Yeah. All right. This next item. So it looks like someone has dug up the source code for the 1978 version of DOS. What is this? 3.1, which is incredible. And then managed to get it to build and run. This is pretty exciting. I haven't watched this video yet. Have you, Mike?
No, I haven't. This is crazy.
Larry Green. Larry Green says that I managed to get the June 2nd, 1978 listing donated by Paul Lawton to the Digibarn and Computer History Museum, assembled and booting on an integer ROM Apple II Plus with a 13-sector disk controller, which is amazing. So he links to the source code, which we will also link to, and this is the source code for DOS 3.1, and I'm not sure. This was never released as far as I know. I think DOS 3.2 was the first commercial release, unless am I mistaken there?
I believe it was 3.1, but this is back when they were releasing updates every couple of months, and as we can see from the description here, the one released in June was not compatible with the one released in October, and to make it even more challenging, he's working off of source code that was donated to the Digibarn and Computer History Museum and scans. So then you've got this whole regression just to get it back into digital form, and then I'm sure there was some work stitching this together. And it's wow, guys.
Yeah, that's amazing. DOS 3.2 certainly had pretty widespread distribution, but I think 3.1 has got to be pretty rare. All right, this next item actually is about you, Alex. So it looks like you've been adding more 8-bit on 3.5 items to the site. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember how my obsession with getting 8-bit software in 3.5-inch disc started. I know I had a couple of Davidson educational programs like Math Blaster Plus myself, like the fully boxed copy of that. And I sort of always wondered, there must be more of this stuff out there. And as it turns out, it is. And when I went to Tony Diaz's to archive a lot of stuff that he had an Apple IIc Plus book, which was kind of evangelizing how much software was already out there for the Apple II. But they also listed specifically all these 8-bit titles on 3.5-inch disc. And turns out there was actually a lot of it released. But I think, around about that time in the late 80s, and again with people not even cracking educational stuff on 5.25-inch disc, they certainly weren't doing it much for the 3.5-inch disc versions. So not much of it's archived, but I really love this stuff because it does, take away the disk swapping, and I would imagine 3.5-inch disk access is a bit faster. And I mean, I'm always quite keen to, get Apple II software running to the modern equivalent so people will be interested in it. I don't want people to be turned off by having to flip disks or, swap disks, that sort of thing. So, Antoine's just, keeping out an eagle eye and finding more of this stuff from eBay and even other sources. I'm not sure where he's getting all this stuff from, but he always very generously cracks it if it needs to be cracked and then images it, and then we get it online to be archived.
Excellent. Yeah, as a fan of the 2C Plus myself, I love that section of your site. I was also amazed how much 8-bit software actually did come out on 3.5, and yeah, I've played with a lot of it since then. So it's a lot of fun. I mean, the 3.5-inch disc in the 8-bit world is a lot of fun because it's just enormous. I mean, it's like a hard drive. I mean, if I had a 3.5-inch drive for my 8-bit Apple II, I mean, I probably, I wouldn't have needed a hard drive ever. Probably, I mean, that was just so much space for that machine. So yeah, it's fun to play with.
Yeah.
All right, Mike. Looks like we got some stuff going on with Apple Commander here. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, Brendan Robert, who I think he's been on the show in the past. I think he's working with Lawless Legends. Lawless Legends. That I think is sort of his current focus, but he also developed the Apple Commander, which is a great way to deal with disk images, and he's announced that this is now part of the Maven Central repo. So I guess you can now. The idea is that you can build this into your own projects. Is that right, Quinn?
Yeah, it looks that way. So if you're a Java developer, you have easy access to the features of Apple Commander, which should be pretty handy for anyone developing, software that's sort of going to connect in some way to Apple II stuff or be a utility in some way for Apple II. It's nice to use Java because then it's just automatically cross-platform, which is pretty handy. And in fact, I think related to this, I changed this item on you, Mike, because I think your link might have been wrong. So the note says Brendan Roberts is also looking to modernize ADT Pro. Can you tell us more about that? Your link pointed to Apple Commander, which is...
Brendan has also mentioned that he wants to modernize the interface on ADT Pro. He said in this post on ComSys Apple II, he says, the program is fantastic, but now that I'm on a high DPI Windows laptop, it's really hard to use because the window is super tiny.
Yeah, I suppose it would be, yeah.
And apparently the RxTX is not being maintained, so he's looking to do that. This is sort of just an announcement of his intentions, and he's set up a GitHub for anyone who wants to check out the work and contribute. There's nothing there yet that you can really run, but it's ADT Pro FX is, I think, what it's going to be called. And he's thinking maybe CC65 might be a good way to go. So look for that in the future. And if you can help out, definitely stop by that link and volunteer.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, honestly, no offense to Brendan, but if I had one request for Apple Commander, it would be that it not be written in Java. I know, it's handy because it's cross-platform, but yeah, it is sort of annoying in a native environment to have this one window that behaves weirdly and is a weird size, and you can't resize it, and it just whenever people mix these platform agnostic languages into native environments, it's never a very smooth experience.
Well, maybe the Internet Archive can make a web version of it.
Yeah, that's probably coming. All right. VFC Zurich is a thing that's apparently happening right now. Is that right?
Yeah, this was, I actually just noticed this on Twitter a couple of days ago. I didn't even know that there was one in Zurich. And they were asking for retweets. I don't know if this was like a last minute thing but the only link that I have is to a Google Drive document that's entirely in German, but I do know that it's happening this weekend. So, obviously by the time this goes live, it'll be over. You can check out the remains of that at vcfe.ch.
The remains of that. Yes. Okay. I'm sure everyone will survive it, but
hey, I love my colorful metaphors. Stop it.
Okay. All right. This next item I have to take because I love it. So recently, 4am of Apple II cracking fame posted a picture of a T-shirt from the 80s, and it's one of these T-shirts that some schlock marketing company probably made to try and appeal to the kids today. But it's completely tone deaf, and so it's a shirt with a picture of a pirate, and he's stabbing his sword at a floppy disk, and it says at the top, official computer pirate, and below that it says cracking expert. And it's got like 6 different fonts on it. Somehow there's more fonts than words in this thing. It's an astonishing piece of graphic design nightmare. And so 4am posts a picture of this thing, and he says, if someone makes this T-shirt, I will buy it and wear it to Kansas Fest. And within hours, somebody had...
Minutes.
Yeah, it was incredible how fast this all happened. Someone else on Twitter scanned it, and then someone else on Twitter vectorized it, and then someone else on Twitter put it up on Zazzle, and you can now buy this thing, and we will link to it in the show notes, and it is terrible and amazing, and we should all wear this to K-Fest, I think.
I think the design of this is actually based on an ad that ran on the back of a Computist magazine, the magazine that had all the cracks for software that sort of works sometimes depending on the version that you had. And I think they readjusted the layout, like, where the pirate's standing and stuff. But yeah, this was I think a real thing that was being sold in the back of this magazine. Now, I imagine after 2 washings it fell apart completely. But now you can have one on high quality, 100% cotton and all that. So run, don't walk.
Yes, and the irony of things like this is, while I'm sure nobody bought it at the time, if you found one of these from that period on eBay, it would probably fetch $500
easily.
It would be just the right amount of worn, and it's so cheesy, and people, would love that stuff nowadays.
We should have a contest at Kansas Fest to see how many, if we can count up how many people bought and wore that thing to Kansas Fest.
Yes, yeah. Well, and
because I'm sure 4AM's not going to be the only one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I want to buy one and wash it 100 times with tennis balls, try to wear it out and make it look vintage. That would be great.
Well, then you can say, see, I got the original. You guys just got this new thing that showed up on Twitter. Rip-offs. Get off my lawn.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, Mike, talk to me about what's going on in Finland.
Well, I hear it's cold there sometimes.
Yes, especially now.
Yeah, and our friend Jorma has decided, I guess, to deal with this imaginary cold by starting FinApple, the blog of all things Apple II in Finland. I didn't even know that they were really up in Finland, but they apparently were, and he's cataloging all of it.
Excellent. I imagine if you are in Finland, the cold is not very imaginary at all.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, yes. As someone who grew up in Canada, I can attest that the cold is in fact quite real. All right, so some fun things from Hackaday, not strictly Apple II related, but looks like they are running a 1K programming challenge. And they are saying you can do this on anything from Arduinos to microcontrollers, etc. But this looks like a really great thing to do on your Apple II. And if you do that, you will definitely be the coolest person in this contest.
Yeah, they specifically mentioned in the notes that it's any platform. And if you scroll down into the comments, in fact, there's somebody, Adam Fabio.
We know that name.
Actually, Peter Noyes actually posted as a 6502 developer. I'm pretty excited about this. And Adam responded that a few of us here on the staff doubted any 6502 people would enter. So let's prove them wrong. And any platform. And I imagine the output of bang for your bit, so to speak, from a K of code on a 6502 is going to be different than, and maybe even more impressive than what it would be on a more modern platform.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think most people are probably going to do this contest on a microcontroller, on an ATmega or something like that. But the joke will be on them because in that same 1K, an Apple II can do vastly more interesting and fun things than a microcontroller can. Because, a microcontroller has very minimal I/O, it has no video, it has no peripherals. Yeah, absolutely. Someone who does this on an Apple II is probably going to win because you could build quite an impressive graphical game or demo, I'm sure, in 1K.
As of this recording, the official rules, other than that, I guess, and details haven't been posted yet. So who knows what, if anything, you'll win. But if you do on a 6502, you'll be cool and the envy of all your friends.
Maybe I should do this on Veronica because then I will have participated on a computer I made myself. Just saying.
You always got to be a one-upper, Quinn.
Plug. Last time I turned Veronica on, it didn't work. So I managed to fix it, but I don't know what its days might be numbered. I don't know.
Oh, no. We have to preserve that right now.
Yeah. The chief weakness I predict is all of the PCBs. There's no solder mask on them because they're, I etched them in my kitchen.
Yes.
So the copper is going to oxidize probably. So I may have to. I could seal them with some spray or something maybe. But
her life was beautiful but short.
Yeah, exactly. Preserved forever on the blog though. Well, moving right along, this is a perfect item for this episode since we have Alex here on the show. Jimmy Marr of The Digital Antiquarian, the blog that we managed to mention at least 17 times every episode because it's amazing.
We love it.
Yes, and I'm sure all of our listeners already read it, but one of his recent posts is History of Neuromancer, and I was actually quite surprised to see this item on there because, it wasn't like a landmark title, in the industry at the time or anything. I don't think it was kind of an obscure game. I mean, I guess it probably did well, but certainly based on a fairly popular book, but kind of niche at the time. But anyway, William Gibson, my favorite author, Neuromancer, probably my favorite book. And this, by extension, one of my favorite games. And the 2GS version is fantastic. So everyone should definitely play that. And we will link to that, of course, on what is the Apple IIgs. And I think what's especially great about this, which is not always the case, is that the 2GS version, I think, is the definitive version of this game. It came out on a number of platforms, but this and probably Rastan, the 2GS, is the platform you want to play it on. Alex, I assume you've played this one?
I have. I haven't played it all the way to the end, but it's definitely an enjoyable but sort of complex game at the same time. It's the thing that interested me from an archival point of view is there's no credits on it, and as it turns out, it was Berger Becky who programmed that. Mm-hmm. But for a while there didn't seem to be much of a record that she had coded that herself. It sort of was, I guess you could kind of guess that she would have, but there's just no credits on there, which I thought was quite strange.
Yeah, we learned from her keynote at Kansas Fest recently, a couple of years ago, that she was sort of uncredited or only mildly or quietly credited for a lot of 2GS ports of things. And so I think, when she started listing off all the games that she had ported, that she had, a lot of people in the audience were like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea that was you." All these games that just appeared on the 2GS were very much her efforts. So. This one included. All right. Well, our friends at Ultimate Apple II have been busy. They are on Facebook now. This is pretty exciting, eh, Mike?
Yeah, they finally have an official web or Facebook page. And one of the newest projects that Anthony just posted about actually is it looks like they're aiming to clone the Idea 2C drive, that sort of mystical bison that we've talked about here on the show before. They've worked, looks like they've worked with Berger Becky to use some of her equipment to at least come up with a proof of concept. They've got some nice photos up there. So now I don't know if this will ever be a product that the unwashed Apple II masses can buy themselves, but it's neat to watch the progress as they work on it. And they've got all their other their latest products and projects up there as well. They're, RAM factor clones and gal sets for the Transwarp GS and things like that. So that seems to be the place to go right now. Excellent.
Yeah, they've made noises that maybe this Idea 2C clone will be a real thing. They're certainly further along than I thought they were. They have real PCBs that are, look pretty much ready to go. So I imagine Berger Becky's probably writing like ROM code and stuff like that for it, as well as, maybe drivers or things like that. Because I think she was, if I'm not mistaken, she was involved in the original. I think she said that she wrote the ROM for the original or something. There's some connection there, if I'm not mistaken, but I might be making that up. But anyway.
Was that for the Focus drive?
Maybe I might be confusing those. I'm not sure. Anyway, all of your hearsay is here, folks.
False information.
Yeah. We call this the news section. Really, it's just the we make stuff up section. Anyway, nice to see Ultimate Apple II on the social medias with the tweet books and the snap faces and things. Moving right along, Computer History Museum is interviewing people. Help me out here, Mike. My Google Doc is cutting this off.
Yeah. Well, this is
very professional. I can't be bothered to widen this column. You talk.
Oh my goodness. Can't even double click. Computer History Museum has established a growing tradition, I guess, of really excellent video interviews and sessions with industry pioneers and famous people that you probably heard of. And in this case, they talked to Taylor Pullman. And this is particularly interesting, I think, to Apple II and III users because Taylor was the Apple II project leader for a long time at Apple, and he worked and then moved over to the Apple III. And now the interview is long, so long. It's in 2 parts, and it's 4 hours. The second interview, I think, is mostly about what he did after he left Apple, which was he went to Forethought and they made FileMaker Pro, that sort of thing. But the first part of it is definitely interesting because he talks less about the technology because he was more of a manager than an engineer or programmer, and you get a lot of personal anecdotes. And he talked about the difference between like the early Apple computer and how it was sort of this open, here's this Apple II, you pop the lid off and it's a sandbox, go play. And the later machines that kind of started with the Apple III and then to the Lisa and Mac where everything was closed. And they sort of took this attitude that, we know what you want and we'll tell you what you want to do with your computer. And he did tell, there's an interesting, really fascinating anecdote where he talked about, remember, I don't know if you knew this, but Jobs moved the Mac project off to these secret offices, and I guess you had to have like a special thing on your badge even to get into those buildings if you worked at Apple. And Taylor marched a bunch of their Apple II group over to that building and just kind of walked in, pushed the guard out of the way, and they got in there, and he's describing it, and there's like this marble fountain and huge cubicles, and it's all nice and quiet. And he said, and then I realized there are 2 Apple computers, and we're working at the other one. And that's kind of when he left. But yeah, there's some really great stuff there. Then if you can sit there for a while and have the time, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I think I've heard that story in some other context about the marching over there and finding out that that it's like a palace over there and everyone's living large. A lot of people probably left after that. All right. Well, it's always nice to see user group newsletters get archived because those are definitely among the things that tend to get lost forever if nobody takes the time to scan them. So it looks like Washington Apple Pie's complete collection of newsletters is online. Is that right, Mike?
Mostly complete. And it's been a couple of years since I was last at this website. And at the time, they only had a few issues available. And if I recall, they were like sample issues. And if you wanted the rest, you had to buy a membership to Washington Apple Pie. But it looks like now they've got almost all of it, starting from the club's beginnings in 1979 all the way up through 2009. Many, many more issues are available in PDF format for you to download and look at. There are, this is mostly member contributions and scans. So like 1981 is missing May through December, and 88, 89, and 90 are missing entirely, but many years are complete. And it's a nice history of Apple from outside Apple, from the users and the groups that were supporting at the time.
Nice. Yeah, the user group newsletters are always fun to read because they're very genuine and without all the layers of marketing hype and so on.
Yep.
All right. Well, that wraps up our news, but it looks like we've got a Woos item. There's a long lost segment. I guess we did record that bumper for it, so why don't you slap that in here, Mike?
Yep, just couldn't stay away. I had to annoy Quinn one more time with the Woos.
We like Woz, and we know you do too. It's Woz News. It's Woos.
All right, so this is a Kickstarter for the US Festival 1982 feature-length documentary, which was a US Festival was it happened in 82 and 83. It was a weekend-long music festival, I guess sort of a proto-palooza thing. That was funded mainly by Woz during the time that he had left Apple and was kind of trying to find himself and do other things.
Trying to find things to do with his money.
Right, exactly. Well, they found lots to do with this money because I think he said later that he lost millions on each one of these. But that wasn't really the point. Wasn't to make money. It was to have fun and have great concerts, and he was very happy about that. But I think for a while something like this has been in in some sort of progress. I remember seeing clips on YouTube of like what this documentary would be. Now, I don't know if this is the same group of people, but that the one that I'm talking about was a couple of years ago, and I don't think it ever went anywhere. So maybe we're trying again, or maybe it's a different group. I don't know. Anyway, as of this recording, they've got 31 days to go. They're looking for $60,000, and they're already up to $19,100. So if you want to see Woz doing other things than Apple, then you can check that out if it comes out.
All right. Well, that wraps up our Woos segment. A fan favorite. So,
but
I think,
not a host favorite.
Yeah, well, it's your favorite, so that's fine. I accept that. So why don't we roll into our second installment of our new segment, the magazine flashback. I guess we don't have a bumper for that, do we?
We have no bumper.
All right. Let's just imagine we had a lovely British lady saying things here.
Do you want an Australian accent, Bob?
Ah, there you go. Yes. That's next best thing. Some Australian guy. All right.
Imagine a brain whose left side is as brilliant as its right. A brain as artistic as it is logical, that can calculate and create. Such a brain exists in the remarkable new Apple IIgs. Brilliant graphics, brilliant color, brilliant sound, to help you use both sides of the most personal computer of all, your mind.
So this month we're going to talk about Soft Talk Volume 1, Number 2, carrying on from our sequence from last month, where we started with the very first episode, or issue, I should say. So Mike, why don't you get us started here?
Yeah, so this is October 1980. This thing went for $1. Wow. and this is, I think, this cover is sort of indicative of how it's going to go for the rest of the run of Soft Talk. It's well polished and well produced, but whimsical. There's a man on a beach with I'm just going to say an exaggerated smile, and he's a pirate. Because there's a big article on piracy in this, and they've looks like there's an article on VisiCalc, and of course the pirate's chest with all this software spilling out onto the sand, because that's where you would use it, I guess.
Yeah, it's nice to see 4am on the cover. He was active even back then. And can I just say that people using actual pirates as metaphor images for software pirates has never been funny.
No, not even then.
I'm just going to throw that out there. But anyway, but the cover is very cute. And I will say it does date itself a little bit, because there's a whole section in this issue on using computers for disabled folks, and they use the word handicapped, which
on the cover.
Yeah, they in a large print is that word, and we don't really use that word anymore. But it is a product of its time.
I have in my head the South Park member berries going, remember when you could say handicap and not get in trouble? Even this early on in the run, it's clear that the staff at Soft Talk was very interested in engaging with their users and getting them involved and making, this is everyone's magazine, not just ours. They announced a contest where you count the number of apples that appear in the magazine, and if you get it right, you could win $100 in goods produced by any advertiser in the issues. So, really going all out here.
Yeah, well, and to clarify, so this contest is sort of mind-boggling. I'd really love to know if anybody won it or what the answer was, because they want you to count every picture of an apple, every Apple logo, every actual real edible apple, and every instance of the word apple, either the noun or the proper name, anywhere in the magazine.
Wow.
So, I counted 30 on that page, I think. So I don't know what the total is, but I'd be very curious to see if anyone got it. I guess it's one of those things like counting the jelly beans in the jar. No one's ever going to get the exact number because it's very, very large and specific.
Right.
But anyway, fun contest. And the next thing that struck me here is this is the first appearance of assembly lines. So, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, the long-running and ultimately very popular a series of articles by Roger Wagner on how to learn assembly programming. In fact, it was so popular that Chris Torrance recently republished all the articles in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that book is largely responsible for me getting back into Apple II development. It's so well written. Like, it's such a great reintroduction to Apple II assembly language that heartily recommended for anyone who wants to do that.
Yeah, well, and there were tons of assembly language books out at the time, and I think what made Roger's work stand apart was how well he made complex topics and ideas simply understood. And a lot of those books failed to do that. And you'd open this thing up and the first 3 chapters were on binary math. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
Are you kidding me? Throw that away. That's never going to happen. So.
Yeah, a lot of people who've suffered through a computer science education feel that everyone else should learn it that way too. I suffered learning, Carnot maps, so you're going to do it too.
That's right.
Yeah, and Roger also never shied away from the hard topics, like, here's high-res graphics on the Apple II. It's horrible, but here's how you do it. And he presents it in a very understandable way. And, we should mention that the Assembly Lines book, the reissue by Chris Torrance, is also partially responsible for Kevin Savitz's win at Kansas Fest, because he literally sat down and read that book and then wrote his first assembly language game on the Apple II and won Kansas Fest with it. So, that's not nothing.
Man, we got to change the rules there. We can't have Atari people winning Apple contests.
Yeah, well, yes. But every time a podcast mentions Kevin Savitz, an angel gets its wings. So we covered
or something horrible.
Yeah, we've covered that at least for the episode. And we would be remiss, of course, if we didn't mention the second major news item in this issue, which is, of course, Apple's IPO is announced. I'm really, really sad that I was 6 years old at the time and would not have known what an IPO was and could have bought some of that stock and would now be on a beach somewhere and not have to talk to you people.
What might have been.
Yeah.
Yep. So this was all timed very carefully. The Apple III was introduced earlier that year, and the units were supposed to start shipping right before the IPO because, that's the big business, their new business computer that was going to take over the corporate desktop right in time for you to buy all this stock. And of course, it didn't really work out that way, but the stock ended up in the long run doing very, very well, as you pointed out. Yeah.
Yeah, that Apple computer, they did all right, turns out.
There is one other item here in the Newspeak section where Tom Whitney, one of the Apple managers, is talking about how basically every system manufactured after January 1981 is now going to have to meet the new FCC rules, which was a huge deal back then because, people were making computers and they were interfering with television, and the FCC said, well, government has to get involved in this. So they rewrote all the rules, and it got very expensive for a lot of the makers. I think Tandy, in fact, discontinued a couple of lines of their early home computers entirely because it was just too expensive to re-architect them. Fortunately, Apple didn't have that problem, but so that was looming on the horizon for the industry.
Yeah, Apple managed to get away with a lot in this regard, and I never figured out exactly how they did that. I mean, Atari was basically forced to build their computer as a 600-pound lead block, and the Apple II managed to get away with wrapping the RF modulator with a piece of tin. Not really sure how they managed that. I mean, the Apple II was certainly not compliant in terms of electromagnetic emissions. So, I don't know how they managed that. Better lawyers than Atari, maybe.
And if you've or one of those people that's collected a bunch of different Apple II Pluses and things like that, and you open them up, you can probably see evidence of different things that they were trying. There's some of them have RFI paint, and some of them have those extra strips, and some of them have different RFI paint, and some of them have different leads on the motherboard. So
and none of it really worked.
Right.
Set up a ham radio next to your Apple II and listen to the excitement. All right. I have to ask, Alex, did you ever have any Apple II stock? Or, Apple stock?
I wanted to buy stock in 1996 when they were on the ropes. I was a student and I had no idea how you would go about buying stock. To be honest, I don't even know how you do it now, to be honest. But Yeah, back then I had no idea. I assumed you needed a stockbroker or something like that, and I certainly didn't have one of those. But let's just say, if I put the money I wanted to put into Apple at that point, I probably wouldn't need to work now.
You'd own the island next to the one Quinn was on.
That's right.
Yeah. Have you seen, there's a spreadsheet somewhere on the interwebs where for all the money you've paid for Apple machine over these years, if you put it into Apple stock instead, how much money you would have made from that instead.
Interesting.
It's quite sobering.
Yeah, it's even worse knowing that because Apple was in such dire straits at the time, hey, even if they went out of business and you bought the stock, you didn't really lose that much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in the 90s there, Apple was in such bad shape that I don't know if anybody would have thought it was a good idea to buy that stock anyway, honestly. I mean, who could have predicted, the iPhone and the iPod and everything else? But yeah. Anyway, so looks like next up we've got a fairly extensive article on personal software and how they're structuring their management and so on. And this article I found interesting for a couple of reasons. One, because personal software, so that the article is very optimistic, very positive. VisiCalc's doing very well. It's still, a year in, it's top of the charts. And this was pretty much it for them. Despite the lofty tone of this article, how the elaborate management structures and so on they're engaged in, how they're modeling their company after Apple in many ways. They never really did much after this. But I will say that this article has many fonts in it, which I found amusing. I think that as excellent as the soft talk production values are, even this early, it looks like maybe they got a little carried away with the typefaces in this particular article.
Yeah, the subtitle is Smooth Sailing on Any Seas, which is particularly ironic considering what happened when the Lotus 123 Juggernaut was released and pretty much crushed them and everybody else in the industry. And instead of coming up with better products to compete, the personal software just turned on its on VisiCalc Incorporated, which was the company they had set up to distribute the software they were writing. And it got very ugly, and it was just awful.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Moving right along. What's the next
There's
item?
That word.
That word?
Handicap.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's everywhere in this article, or in this issue. We just sort of have to read it in an 80s mindset and know they meant well.
Hey, what is this Eaton 7000 personal computer printer? That looks pretty cool. I want one of those.
Yeah, it's a thermal receipt.
Look like a printer.
It is a thermal receipt printer, and I don't think you want one.
But it prints at 1.2 lines or 1.25 lines a second.
Yeah, it turns out those things are really useless, but they were inexpensive, so a lot of people bought them. Anyway, so the next article that caught my eye was it was sort of an interview with a guy about a product, but it's more about the guy than the product. So he's telling the story of how he couldn't afford a floppy drive, and so he got this cassette drive, and the cassette drive was terrible because cassette tapes are terrible. And so he came up with this device, and unfortunately they never really explain what the device does. It's called the Cassette Master, and it looks like, it's a little metal box about the size of a couple of decks of cards, and it's got what looks like a meter on it. So my guess is that this thing is like a leveler, or maybe even just a level meter, or I don't know if it's doing some kind of active leveling to sort of steady out the cassette signal. It's just to improve the reliability of reading and writing to cassettes. Anyway, it seems that, again, the early optimism of the time, he developed a prototype and he brought it to a company, and they were like, this thing is amazing, we want it, go make 1,000 and we'll sell them for you. And he went off and made 10. And he was making them by hand, and so it took forever, and he gave up with that, and then he went to get funding, and so the article ends with how excited he is to go and get funding, and then that never happened. So as far as I know, only 10 of these things exist, and if anyone has one, it is probably worth a fortune because it's fascinating. So as peripherals go, this thing has got to be among the rarest for the Apple II, because, here it is in print that only 10 were ever made. So no doubt Paul Hagstrom has 2 in box, but aside from that...
And the manuals and the source code.
That's right. Neat thing. If anyone ever sees one, let us know. All right, well, speaking of piracy, the cover article is next. What did you think of this one, Mike?
I love these articles because typically they'll start out talking to the software developers who are appropriately outraged. Then they'll get some anonymous 16-year-old kid that, yeah, screw the man, I'm taking the stuff anyway. And these kind of articles were all over these magazines in back then, and it didn't help that Computist was out there sort of encouraging it without really actively encouraging it. And there were I think Locksmith and EDD and Back It Up were starting to show up on the market at this time, and there was an argument among the publishers about whether they should run ads for BitCopy software, because apparently all it did was help people pirate. And there were letters from editors to other editors, and yeah, it was. I love this stuff. I really do. It's high drama for Apple II fans.
Yes. Well, and as we learned recently from a talk at Kansas Fest by Mark Pilgrim, Locksmith was actually playing both sides. They were selling copy protection to software houses and then selling the software to consumers to break it, which I find hysterical. They were actively creating their own market. But
apparently they had serialized each copy of Locksmith so that when you made a copy, it was marked and they could figure out, who supposedly they could, I assume, sell that information to the publishers that, hey, he took your stuff, not me.
Yeah. But yeah, the one that really sticks out for me in this article is what I've come to call the pirate math that every such article always does, and it's completely wrong, which is that they do the math. Well, the average person has X number of pieces of pirated software, so times the cost of that software times the number of people, and the number they come up with is $1 million has been siphoned, quote, siphoned out of the software industry, which of course is nonsense because, the data shows and has since shown, people have looked at this, that all of that pirated stuff, the vast majority, if not all of it, is stuff that people would not have bought if they weren't able to copy it. So it isn't lost sales. It actually ends up just being a positive marketing effect because people are seeing the software who otherwise never would have.
It's the same thing that the RIAA did in the late 90s and the MPAA is doing now, that every pirated copy is a lost sale. And it's nonsense. Yeah, I love that they even go out of their way to attack user groups in this article, saying that basically that, these user groups are actually just used to pirate software. Everybody gets together and it's a pirate party.
Yeah. I will say, though, in my youth, I participated in many computer programming competitions. And, it was an official thing. And we had timed competitions, and there was a creative competition where you had a presentation and you presented software that you'd built. And, it was all very on the level. But everybody participated in it for the free time that they gave you during the day to share software.
I'm not saying it didn't happen. I just love the way they were attacking it here.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, it's just, user groups weren't all that, but yeah, I'm just saying programming competitions were definitely about that. At least ours were.
This is a case of the law being 20 years behind technology, and this new thing is happening, and we feel like we're losing out. What do we do? The law doesn't protect us. And there's a lot of jumping around and hand waving and not a lot of answers.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about piracy on this episode. Alex, I don't know if we've ever actually asked you, did you pirate a lot of software?
Are you guilty?
I kind of didn't, actually. Well, it depends. Sort of like I mentioned, I grew up in a town called Newcastle. Didn't know anyone with an Apple IIgs, but I did know people with 8-bit Apple IIs, and certainly copied 8-bit 2 stuff, games especially. But in terms of 2GS stuff, I was pretty legit until I got a modem. And that was 1992. Mm-hmm. So, I was quite legit.
I think that's probably most people. They were fairly legit till you get a modem. Once it gets easy enough to pirate, then suddenly you find yourself doing it more and more.
Yeah, I was amazed just what else was out there. Because in Australia, we there was, for some software distribution companies in the US, there was no local distributor in Australia. So some titles were just really hard to get hold of, full stop.
Yeah, there was some of that in Canada as well, where there was a lot of software that we just couldn't get. So, pirating was the only way to get it. I mean, not that excuses it, and not that we didn't also pirate everything that was available. But, just, in our defense, a lot of that stuff wasn't available in Canada.
It's a gateway drug.
Yes. We were archivists, honest.
That's right. Years ahead.
That's right. All right. So next up, we've got a list, the list of 30 top-selling pieces of software. And what I loved about this is, we interviewed Bill Budge recently on the show. And at this point in history, what did you say the date was, Mike? 1980?
Yeah, this is October 80.
October 1980. Bill Budge has 3 software packages in the top 30 sales for Apple II. So Budgeco is doing pretty good at this point. And the number 3 is one that I don't think I had heard of. I don't think he mentioned it in our interview, something called Space Album. Do you know what that is, Mike? I had no idea what that was.
I think that's a collection, if I recall, of 4 different games that he had put together that weren't, I think enough to be considered full games that you could sell separately. They were early works of his, and I was actually reading a different user group newsletter recently where they were reviewing it and talking about its genius and what a great job he had done even then. So this is everything Bill turned to gold for good reason. It was good.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, and there was because the next one down, a little further down the list, is Bill Budge's trilogy, they call it. So I guess that's probably something similar. It was 3 games that he had packaged up, I guess.
I think, wasn't the trilogy the 3 pinball things that he did? Could
be. I think this is too early though for Raster Blaster and all that. But then the last one towards the bottom is the 3D graphics library that he wrote that we did talk to him about. So nice to see that on there. I didn't realize it had sold so well.
I've actually got 2 copies of Space Album.
Really?
Fully in their bags. Yeah.
Wow.
I barely have any of the really early Apple II stuff, but I got donated a whole bunch of stuff from a guy in Melbourne who sort of just wanted to whittle down his collection, and I got 2 full baggy copies in mint condition of Space Album. Yeah, and I saw on eBay they go pretty high, but I can't say I ever want to get rid of them.
Yeah, I would hang on to those. I've certainly never seen one. That's really cool that a couple of them made it all the way to Australia. I wonder.
Yeah.
I bet you should tweet at Bill Budge. I bet he'd like to know that because I doubt he's aware that any of them made it to Australia unless he personally mailed them out there.
Yeah, cool.
So Space Album was Death Star, Solar Shootout, Asteroids, and Tail Gunner. And it doesn't. I'm looking at the disk image listing here on the archive, but I don't see what the 3 games were. The trilogy was Night Driver, Pinball, and Tranquility Base.
Okay, cool. Very cool. All right. So the last time I wanted to call out was actually the very last page. There's a full page ad for Automated Simulations, the company that made Temple of Apshai, and why the reason I liked this is that we bought Temple of Apshai for our 8-bit Apple II, and it was one of the few games we did buy in the store, and I even remember distinctly the store that we bought it in. I have a very vivid memory of it. It may have been the first game actually that we ever bought, and but what's fantastic about this ad is that there are no screenshots. So it's hard to even imagine buying a computer game today without seeing what it looks like. But this full-page ad lists several complex, elaborate RPGs, and it lists various statistics about them that are supposed to sell you how many magic items there are, this sort of thing, but no screenshots. And so you have no idea, none whatsoever, what these games look like. Are they first person? Are they third person? Are they top down? Are they tile based? You have no idea. Is it a text adventure? You don't know. So I find it fascinating that people were paying, $30, $40, $50 for these games based on these ads where you literally have no idea what they look like. That's mind-boggling, I think, to a modern gamer.
Yeah, I think there's sort of a level of understanding there that the graphics are not going to be good, and I'm going to have to use my imagination for some of this at least.
Yeah.
And I can't be too disappointed if it's nothing but text and, broken English and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I was, I guess, the leading edge of the generation that really cared about graphics. And so I remember going to computer stores and looking at software and being really annoyed if they didn't have Apple II screenshots on the box.
Yep.
That drove me crazy because I really did care what the game looked like. And that was a lot of it. And a lot of games, I bought Bard's Tale in the store, and I bought Wasteland in the store and a couple of others. And I bought them largely based on the screenshots. So...
what really got me were the Apple II titles. There weren't many of them, but there were a few that it was an Apple II game, but it had PC graphics on the back. And I had to remind myself to check and make sure a screenshot from Apple II, not Commodore 64.
Yeah, it was always the Commodore 64 version because, of course, it was always the best looking one, if we're being honest. And that drove me crazy when they only had Commodore screenshots on the box.
Even some Apple II game reviews in Insider and A+ seem to use screenshots from other platforms, which was disappointing when you finally got your hands on the Apple II version.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I think there were some 2GS games that had non-2GS screenshots on the box too, which also drove me crazy because that's a platform where it's all about the graphics. So and the ports were so rare that it was even more frustrating when you didn't know what it looked like. I think they often use the Amiga screenshots in 2GS games because it was probably the closest port. But it would have killed them to take a screenshot of the 2GS version.
Not that hard.
Yeah. Well, that's all I had for this issue, Mike. Did we skip over anything you wanted to call out?
Not anything big. A couple little notes here. Just going back to the bestsellers list thing. There's a mention of this early fragmentation of the game market, and it's the gaming industry. And it's funny because they're talking about like there's this group of games and they all look exactly the same. It's Super Invader, Space Invaders, Cosmo Mission, Stellar Invaders, and I was trying to remember back, when I would get those like the file based game discs that had like 6 copies or 6 games, that had been ripped and turned into be runnable files, and loading one of these up and like, I saw that game on this disc called that, I can delete that. And
there was those discs always, in my world, those discs always had a copy of Lady Tut and Gobbler on them.
Yes.
And Sabotage. I think I have 68 copies of Sabotage.
That was a rule, I think, and had to have that. And the other thing was we had Paul Ludus on a while back and talk about Apple Writer. And there's a note here in the list, and he had talked about this other program called Easy Writer, I think.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Which was he claimed was just a ripoff of his program. Mm-hmm. And there's a note here on the list that Easy Writer knocked Apple Writer off the top of the best-selling list.
Oh no!
I hope he didn't see that because he seems to get hot under the collar sometimes. So I thought that was kind of a funny side note. But that's really all I had.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been a long episode, but it's been a good one. I really enjoyed having you on here, Alex. Any closing thoughts? Anything you want to say about your site or anything like that?
Oh, well, it's certainly been my pleasure to be on the show. I sort of didn't realize sort of how much work sort of involved in preparing it and everything. And
that's because we're incompetent.
Not for me, but for you guys. You really run a tight ship. It's fantastic. I mean, all I can say is, look through your collections and check out my site and any other sites that actually have lists of software that we know for sure have never been archived. So just check through your collections and see if you can archive it, and it will not be lost forever.
Oh, so are you interested in this copy of Ultima VI I have for the 2GS here? I've been using it as a coaster. I don't know.
Mildly interested, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, if I get around to it, I'll scan it.
And in the meantime, Alex, we'll look forward to seeing your coffee table book. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again this month. I think either next month or January, depending on schedules, we're probably looking at doing our annual year-end roundtable. And until then, we'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
This has been been the Open Apple Podcast. Subscribe to us in iTunes or visit us at open-apple.net, where you can browse our extensive catalogue of past episodes or read our blog. If you like what you've heard today, or even if you didn't, your comments, questions or ideas are always welcome. Send them to feedback@open-apple.net.